welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha, Khanna, and our focus on the show continues to be on the escalating tensions between India and Canada. Let's get you a complete lowdown. As India-Canada ties continue to nosedive over the Khalistani issue, media reports have surfaced quoting government sources that say Khalistani terrorist Gurpatwant Singh Pannun, whose properties in Punjab were seized last week, wants to create many countries by dividing India. Remember, we are talking about a man who's a Canadian citizen and has been operating freely from that country for years. According to the National Investigating Agency's dossier on Pannun, the head of the banned separatist group Seeks for Justice has challenged the unity and integrity of India via audio messages and wants to create a separate country for the people of Kashmir and also create a separate Muslim country. Pannun has been wanted by the NIA since 2019 for playing a major role in promoting and commissioning terrorist acts to spread fear across Punjab and the country. Investigations have revealed that the Pannun-led Seeks for Justice misuses cyberspace to radicalize gullible youth, instigates them to undertake terrorist activities and fight for an independent state of Khalistan. Seeks for Justice was banned in India in 2019. In 2022, the Union Home Ministry declared Pannun a terrorist. In recent days, since the diplomatic row between India and Canada erupted over the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, another Khalistani terrorist, Pannun has been busy threatening senior Indian diplomats and government officials in Canada. Not only that, in a viral video, he also threatened Hindus in Canada, asking them to leave that country and return to India. There are at least 16 cases against Pannun registered in Punjab, Delhi, Himachal Pradesh, Haryana and Uttarakhand. But guess what? As far as Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is concerned, all this is completely acceptable and kosher in the name of freedom of speech. Not only has Trudeau brooked and in fact encouraged these anti-India forces for years, he has also dealt a body blow to India-Canada ties by making a wild allegation that agents of the Indian government killed Khalistani separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was a Canadian citizen. And as a direct fallout of that, according to Indian intelligence agencies, Indian diplomats and citizens in Canada must stay vigilant and exercise utmost caution as violent protests are being planned by the pro-Khalistan elements in that country as we speak. According to reports, more than 20 pro-Khalistan groups, with the help of Pakistan's ISI, could target Indian diplomats and citizens during these protests. Latest reports also suggest that the Indian government has proposed cancelling the Overseas Citizens of India or OCI cards of Khalistani terrorists in Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States. The Indian government has instructed the investigating agencies to identify all Khalistani terrorists in these countries and cancel their OCI cards to prevent them from entering India. And their properties in India will soon be identified for confiscation, as in the case of Pannun. There is a list of 19 fugitive Khalistani terrorists who've been accused of running anti-India propaganda from abroad. In just the last 1 week, India-Canada relations have plummeted since Trudeau accused India of being involved in Nijjar's killing without offering any evidence to back his claims. India rubbished the allegations as absurd and politically motivated. Soon after, India and Canada expelled each other's senior diplomats and issued travel advisories against each other. India has also asked Ottawa to reduce its diplomatic presence in New Delhi and suspended its visa services in Canada. Now, Canada's Defence Minister Bill Blair has called the relationship with India important, but asserted that these allegations should be investigated. Blair told media outlet Global News, and I quote, "We understand that this can be and has proven to be a challenging issue with respect to our relationship with India, but at the same time, we have the responsibility to make sure that we conduct a thorough investigation and get to the truth. If the allegations are proven true, there is a very significant concern that Canada will have with respect to the violation of our sovereignty," he said. Meanwhile, US Ambassador to Canada David Cohen has claimed that it was shared intelligence among the Five Eyes partners that had prompted Justin Trudeau to go public with his big charge against India. Five Eyes is an intelligence sharing alliance between Canada, the US, the UK, Australia and New Zealand. This is the first admission by any US government official about the sharing of intelligence by Five Eyes partners with Canada. Before Cohen, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken had said he was deeply concerned about Justin Trudeau's allegations and that the US had engaged directly with the Indian government on this issue. Blinken added the US wanted to see accountability and said it's important that the investigation runs its course and leads to results. Some analysts have pointed out that this diplomatic tussle between India and Canada has created a tricky situation for US President Joe Biden. In recent times, Biden has been trying to build a stronger relationship with India as part of a larger strategy in the Indo-Pacific region to compete with China. However, the United States also has strong trade and political ties with Canada. Ottawa is not only a member of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance but also a G7 member. Significantly, recent statements emanating from the Trudeau government seem to suggest that Canada spied on Indian diplomats as part of its investigation into the Niger case. Indian government sources say whether unauthorized equipment was used by Canadian law enforcement agencies to unlawfully monitor Indian High Commission officials may need to be probed. And there has been another revelation made by Niger's own family. They have said that Niger regularly met with Canadian security intelligence officers. This clearly adds yet another intriguing dimension to the entire situation. Meanwhile, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar took a veiled dig at Canada. Speaking in New York, he said, "It is still a world of double standards, and countries that are occupying positions of influence are resisting the pressure to change." He added, nations with historical influence have weaponized a lot of those capabilities. In his words, in the name of the market, a lot of things are done. Like in the name of freedom, a lot of things are done. In another unfortunate fallout of the diplomatic crisis triggered by Justin Trudeau, the parents of Indian students in Canada say they are now quite worried that the standoff could impact their children and expose them to a security risk. They're also worried that their children may experience discrimination or bias based on their nationality now. Many students are also nervous about the possibility that India's decision to suspend visa services in Canada may have a direct implication on their migration. All this when Canada has not even shared a shred of evidence to back its claims against India. With India-Canada ties hitting rock bottom, interestingly, some observers say this is not an India-Canada problem. It is in fact a Trudeau-India problem. So where do ties between the two countries go from here? Let's try and find some answers from our panel of experts. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is former diplomat Ambassador Anil Trigunyat, also Ambassador KP Fabian, former Indian diplomat, and completing the panel is Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, joining us as always from Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome to Global Lens. Ambassador Trigunyat, let me start with you. There's just so much to unpack here. There are two things that I want to discuss right at the outset. One, as we speak, pro-Khalistani groups in Canada are planning major protests targeting Indian missions, Indian diplomats in that country. We are given to understand that barricades have come up outside the Indian High Commission in Ottawa, and there is clearly a sense of fear and insecurity thanks to developments of the last few days. And media reports have also suggested, quoting government sources in India, that Gurpat Vant Singh Pannun, the man who only recently threatened Hindus in Canada, asking them to leave that country and return to India, wants to Balkanize India. That is his larger design, not to mention that there are dozens of cases against the man. He is a Canadian citizen. He has the liberty to openly threaten Hindus in Canada. His videos go viral. He has the freedom to say what he likes, and the Prime Minister of Canada would have us believe it is freedom of speech. How do you view these worrying developments? Let's first talk about these.
Well, number one is we know that Mr. Trudeau has accused India without any evidence, or at least he has not shared any evidence with us, Apparently, the American ambassador uh, confirmed that they had shared some intelligence on the Indian diplomats. That obviously has been an illegal methodology that they have used under the name of Five Eyes or whatever it is. But at the same time, the fact remains is that Canada has become a haven of terrorists. It has become a haven of secessionists. It has become a haven of uh, separatists, and with the support of the Trudeau regimes for the last 40 years. It is not from now. Otherwise, what explains that despite having an extradition treaty, despite having a mutual legal assistance treaty, and despite overtly claiming that they are against any extremism or terrorism, they continue to allow these kind of activities like those of Pannun and Niger and several others just for a political convenience. That's expediency. That's precisely what they're doing. And they are ready even to spoil the relationship with India for his domestic constituency and in the hope that he might win the election. So that's a small point. But at the same time, of course, we are worried about the Indians who are there, even the kind of sectarian remarks that have been made by Pannu and others against the Hindus and the Indian diplomats. We have seen that in front of Sare Gurdwaras, there were photographs of the Indian High Commissioner and the Consul General were put, and there were all these threats were given to them, and now the threats continue to be there. So responsibility for the security is that of the Canadian government. But it appears that the Canadian government is more sincere in providing security and access and all kinds of platforms to the people like Pannu and the Nigers, rather than look after its in the interests and which they have undertaken in terms of the Vienna and other conventions to protect the Indian High Commission, the Indian consulate, the Indians who have gone there, including our students who are feeling a bit nervous now at this time because of the kind of calls the people like Pannu have made. So I think that the Mr. Trudeau needs to wake up and smell the coffee, because this is not something that goes down irrespective of how strong a country is, and they cannot depend on these kind of hoodwinked approaches to allow extremism, terrorism, and secessionism to target India in order to balkanize or create problems in the country and not look after our diplomats and others in their country whom they have a duty, legal duty to do so.
Well, absolutely. Not only is Justin Trudeau encouraging and promoting secessionism in his country, he has dealt a body blow to India-Canada ties like no other leader has in the past. Let's be very clear about it. Before I go across to Ambassador Fabian, I just want to point out for our viewers, once again, the fact that this man who you see on your screen right now, Pannun, the founder of Sikhs for Justice, who has once again called for protests against India in Canada and against India's missions in that country. He is a wanted man in India. He was designated a terrorist by the government of India in 2019. He is wanted by the NIA for promoting and commissioning terrorist acts to spread fear across Punjab and the country. And despite the fact that multiple dossiers on him, his terror activities, and those of many other Khalistani separatists have been shared with the Canadian government, no action has been taken whatsoever. On the contrary, Justin Trudeau decides to make a wild allegation against India publicly, standing in the Canadian Parliament, dealing the biggest blow ever perhaps to India-Canada ties. Let me now go across to Ambassador Fabian. Ambassador Fabian, there have been many statements that have come from Canada in the past 1 week on this issue. It all started with the Foreign Minister of Canada, then of course Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister himself, speaking in the Canadian Parliament. Now, the Defence Minister of Canada has reiterated those allegations, but again, when you ask them for evidence, there are no answers forthcoming. But sir, what do you make of the fact that the US ambassador to Canada, David Cohen, has now claimed that it was shared intelligence amongst the Five Eyes partners that prompted Justin Trudeau to go public with his charge against India? Because even though there were reports of the last several days that intelligence had been shared by one of these countries with Canada. This is the first official admission from one of those countries, and it's the US ambassador to Canada, no less. And then, of course, you have Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, expressing deep concern over this issue and saying that he has engaged with India at the highest levels over this issue. The US wants to seek accountability, etc., etc., etc. What should be made of this, sir?
Well, let's go back to the chronology. On 18th, Prime Minister Trudeau made that statement in the House of Commons. To my mind, the expression credible allegations is absolutely, what shall I say, not the right word.
An oxymoron, for sure.
Because, secondly, Canada itself says that the investigation is still on. So my question is, how can you take action based on an incomplete investigation? But that having said, let's also understand the politics of it. As I said, 18th, Trudeau made the statement in the House of Commons. On the 19th, United States came out with a statement which showed some concern and left it at that. Then the White House came under criticism from the media in the United States, and the next day they came out with a stronger statement saying that the United States has asked India to cooperate. And now, of course, there is a statement by the US ambassador to Canada. I think what we have to understand is that Canada has some what we may call electronic evidence. And you mentioned, Neha, that they have been snooping over our diplomats. Let me tell you, let's be realistic, that is done by most of the countries or by all the countries that have the capability to do so. I agree that it is wrong, but we also have to be realistic that it is being done. And you might remember that some time back when President Obama was there, the Americans had tried to listen into German Chancellor Merkel's conversations. So that is always being done. And then let's be realistic. If you have a Samsung telephone and if the national security asks for all your conversations, well, they will make it available. So I believe they have some electronic evidence. Whether this electronic evidence is conclusive, whether it is sufficient, or is it in the category of, pointing towards, that's a different matter. But in my view, Canada should have acted, whatever the action be. This is, of course, the wrong type of action. Canada should have acted after completing the investigation. And another thing is, even if Canada had reason to believe that there might be, listen to my words, there might be a link with an Indian official, Canada had the option at that time to tell the Indian High Commissioner, listen, we have this sort of reason to believe that there might be a link. Why don't you just quietly transfer that official so that we don't have to go public on that? This has often happened in diplomacy. That is a smarter way of handling the matter. But obviously, I repeat, obviously, Trudeau was under political pressure to say what he said. And that, as I have been always maintaining, is because for his political survival, he needs the support of the New Democratic Party, NDP, led by Jagmeet Singh, who is a publicly, he is a staunch supporter of Khalistan. So you have to also understand the domestic politics. I'm not justifying. I'm saying you should understand, look at the big picture.
You're quite right, sir. Okay, go ahead. Please complete your point, sir.
One more point. I read in Canadian papers that in Surrey, that Gurudwara there, they had billboards threatening the Indian diplomats, and those billboards have been removed, which is good. But basically, I would say Canada has been rather slow in taking appropriate action and even slower in communicating to India what action they have taken, if
Okay.
any.
Okay, I think when you say that Canada has been slow in acting against Khalistani elements, I think that is a very charitable view, sir, because fact of the matter is that Justin Trudeau has been happily looking the other way for a very long time. He endorses these elements. Some of them are part of his government, as you rightly pointed out. But of course, I agree with you, sir, when you say that, Trudeau has made such a mess of this entire situation, ruining relations with a friendly country like India, another democracy like India, over a man called Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who in fact India regards as a Khalistani terrorist. But of course, you refer to his domestic compulsions. There is no denying that Justin Trudeau has been playing vote bank politics for a long time, to the detriment of India-Canada ties. Let me go across to Shri at this point. Shri, lots to discuss here. But let me, for now, go back to the original point that I made at the start of this discussion. Justin Trudeau, in his wisdom, decides to make a wild charge, quite publicly, against India. It's been a week now, not a shred of evidence shared with us. Of course, Ambassador Fabian is right in saying that, he could have taken his Indian counterpart into confidence. They could have taken the Indian High Commissioner into confidence, told us what exactly they had on any Indian official, if at all they did. All we've heard so far are allegations. The US says, yes, we've shared intelligence. The question that India is still asking is, where is that evidence? What is that evidence? What is that intelligence that you're talking about? No answers have been forthcoming. And even as we seek those answers, you have a situation where there are these protests unfolding all over again in Canada with a direct threat posed to India's High Commission and other missions. And this man, who's at the center of it all, Pannun, again, another Khalistani designated as a terrorist by India, is going around issuing threats to Indian diplomats, to Indian students, to Hindus in Canada, asking them to leave the country. And the Justin Trudeau government does absolutely nothing about it. For them, this is freedom of speech.
Right. So, Neha, the Canadian version has been that the information, which now it appears came from the Five Eyes Consortium on Nijjar, had been shared with India even before Prime Minister Trudeau went for the G20 meeting. And apparently at the G20 meeting on the sidelines, the Canadian side had brought up this evidence with the Indian side, which Indian side had said that this is absolutely baseless. So I think, so there is some evidence which at least the Canadian side says that it has submitted to the Indian government. So, but the point is very simple, Neha. So if there is evidence, obviously Indian side is going to look at it and get back to them and tell them if there's any, credence to that or not. I think the other larger issue where I think India is, obviously, I think it's right to be upset is the fact that now for almost 40 years, India has been sending evidence after evidence to Canada on the Khalistan problem and how people living in Canada who have taken Canadian citizenship have been working for, attacking the sovereignty of India. Now, even the Kanishka bombing, Neha, the Canada's own judicial inquiry done by a very, very reputed and senior judge, he concluded that a series of errors by the Canadian police, by the investigators, by the government of Canada allowed the bombing to happen in the first place. Now, after that, what happened? After two people who were, convicted, one has been, one was never really convicted, the other was let go recently. So I think Canada also needs to look at its own approach. It needs to ask a very basic question. Yes, Canada is a free country. It champions underdogs in many ways. But when does a citizen become a terrorist? When does a citizen's right to protest, to speak up, or say anything or criticize anything, when does it cross the line and it becomes an action which is punishable under Canada's own laws? We're not talking about Indian laws, any other law. So at what point, for example, now Pannun is openly inciting Khalistani people to attack Hindus and attack Indian diplomats. Now, is there a Canadian law which prevents such hate crime and hate speech? I'm sure there is. So then I think it's up to Canada now to take this and come to a conclusion that this has finally crossed the line of any civility or any kind of freedom that the Canadian Constitution guarantees its citizens. So the other point I want to make, Neha, is that I have been speaking to a few friends in Canada. In fact, I had a friend from Toronto come and stay with me over the weekend. So, so this is not really top of mind for Canada at the point. Like, yes, British Columbia, Vancouver, which is the hub of the Khalistan movement because of the large Sikh population that is there. But even among that population, the people who are really interested in the Khalistan movement is a minuscule number, right? And in other provinces of Canada, this is not really a top of mind for anyone. So in Toronto, for example, I mean, there is no discussion, or no one's losing sleep over this. So I think Canada, as a country of 38 million people, should wake up and realize that in its quest to be a champion of the underdog, the people persecuted. Now they are getting a lot of Ukrainian people into Canada. They have got Tamils earlier from Sri Lanka. They got a lot of Sikhs under the guise of a persecution of Khalistan. They've been let into Canada. So I think Canada's intentions are good. But I think where it needs to wake up, and the larger Canadians, in fact, need to ask is, at what point do the rights that we guarantee our citizens become a criminal act? So I think that's really is the question. And I don't doubt that Canada will protect the people who are there, whether they're Indians or Hindus or whoever, because I think the system in Canada still works. Especially the police system. I don't think there's any threat to the larger, Indian population that is there. This is a call by some radical elements, and we should treat it for what it is, just a call of a radical people. But if they make any move to physically harm anyone, then the Canadian laws should deal with it very swiftly and effectively.
Okay, I take your point, Shri, but fact of the matter is that in the very recent past as well, we've seen posters being plastered in many different parts of Canada, especially, Toronto and Ottawa, with pictures and names of India's top diplomats. Calling them murderers and killers. Now, if that does not amount to painting a target on somebody's back, I don't know what does. And, does freedom of speech also constitute the freedom to incite violence? That is a question that Mr. Justin Trudeau needs to answer. These are very serious questions. And on the question of evidence, it's interesting that the Premier of British Columbia, the province where Niger was killed, has also publicly expressed his frustration, saying the federal government, that is the Trudeau-led government, has simply not shared enough evidence with them as far as the investigation into this murder is concerned. Let me go back to Ambassador Trigunyat at this point. Ambassador Trigunyat, it is a well-known fact, and Indian agencies have pointed this out repeatedly, especially in the last few days since this row erupted, that over the years, dossier after dossier has been handed over to Canadian authorities detailing the illegal, criminal and terrorist activities of a lot of men like Pannun and Niger. It's not just confined to them issuing threats or exercising quote-unquote their freedom of speech. They have been found to be involved in murders, in killings, in criminal acts and in terror activities in the state of Punjab, in this country. That evidence has been shared with the Canadian authorities. They have continued to look the other way. Talking about Pannun, Indian agencies say that the man clearly has a design to carve out several countries out of India. And this man is getting away with issuing threats in viral videos from Canadian soil. Now, what the Indian government is suggesting is that maybe the time has come to not only confiscate the properties of these Khalistani terrorists in India, and they've begun the process with Pannun, as you know, They're also now suggesting cancelling the overseas citizens of India or OCI cards of these men who India designates as Khalistani terrorists. And a list of 19 fugitive Khalistanis has been drawn up. Do you believe that might be a step in the right direction?
Well, that's one of the steps that helps you prevent your intrusion into your security from these people, because they can freely travel otherwise to India. And we have seen in the past that these Khalistani extremists and terrorists and even others, because of this OCI card or the PIO cards, have been able to infiltrate into India and create mischief. Of course, they have other routes via Pakistan, they've been using very successfully also. So the job of the government basically is to somehow beef up the security internally, and so therefore these NIA action is absolutely in sync with what should be done. And on the other hand, we have to also look at the external dimension of this problem, because this is coming out of Canada, which is British Columbia is said to be Khalistan, and I think Mr. Trudeau should think of designating it as it is, as a Khalistan state, and that will take care of the problem from his end. But if, as was mentioned by your colleague also, an Ambassador Fabian, that there is an international law. There is this law must prevail. There is a domestic law in Canada which prohibits these kind of things, which we are looking at on the ground today. And now more and more protests are going to take place, which will threaten once again if we were to go by the recent past rather. So I think that there again they are failing. Why are they failing? Simply because the government appears to be supporting them, whether openly or covertly. I think that this is something that is very dangerous trend on the part. As far as, Blinken's statement, for example, save me this. When have they gone out everywhere? We will, blow them out, we will take them out, we'll do this anywhere in the world. They don't care about sovereignty or any country, and Canada stands behind. Iraq is there. You have recently Soleimani, they killed him. They killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. They are doing what they want to. There is no sovereignty. They are just terrorists. So if there are terrorists, then the other countries, terrorists are not. So as long as these countries in the West will continue to discriminate between their terrorists and others' terrorists, I don't think that there is going to be any solution to this problem. So this sitting on the high horse, I think that the Americans, the Canadians, they need to look back and scale back, because the time is up for these kind of activities to continue.
I couldn't agree more with you, Ambassador Trigunyat, and you've put it quite emphatically and eloquently that, while we are still waiting for Canada to share with us evidence of India's quote-unquote involvement in Niger's killing, as they would have us believe, countries like the United States should really be the last ones lecturing anyone about, taking out terrorists in other countries' territories. We know about Hussein Soleimani, we know about Osama bin Laden. These are some of the most high-profile cases of the last couple of decades. There are scores and scores of other cases, many of which have probably never even been highlighted by the media. But, Ambassador Fabian, I want to ask you this question. You say that it is not unusual for diplomats to be snooped on, but I would still, say that this is not how you really expect friendly countries to behave. I can understand that happening between India and Pakistan, but here we thought that India and Canada were two relatively friendly countries, two large democracies. But tell me, sir, what do you make of the fact that, the Indian government is saying whether unauthorized equipment was used by Canadian law enforcement agencies to unlawfully monitor Indian High Commission officials will need to be probed. And there is another very interesting revelation that has been made by Niger's own family, the man who was killed. They have said that Niger regularly met with Canadian security intelligence officers. What should be read into this? Now, here's a man who India treats as a terrorist. And if it is true that Canadian security intelligence officials have been regularly hobnobbing with him, what's the takeaway, sir?
Well, let me explain to you, but before that, let me make 2 points. You said that my words were rather charitably chosen.
Oh, only
Yes.
towards the end. The rest I agreed with.
No, you are right. But let me tell you, well, when I was in diplomacy, the style was understatement. And as you know, the old saying, when a diplomat says yes, it means perhaps. When he says perhaps, it is no. And if he says no, he is no diplomat. Okay, and people do understand. And it has now become very fashionable to be loud and overstate. Let them do that, but let me not change my style.
I respect it, sir. I respect that. I do.
Second point. Why should they make so much fuss about a man called Niger, you said? No, that is not a correct, appropriate point of view. For them, Niger is a Canadian citizen. And they have to sort of treat it seriously. Whether their conclusion that India has done it is right or wrong is a different matter. But to sort of, to say that Niger, some of our people say, oh, the guy was a plumber and all that. This is what I call, what shall I say, the you and non-you. Upper class and non-upper class. Class prejudice. We should avoid
But
that.
that's not where I was coming from at all, sir. I promise you. The only point I have been making repeatedly is that this is a man who has for a long time posed a serious threat to India's national security. Here's a man who India has designated as a global terror, I beg your pardon, as a Khalistani terrorist. I am not suggesting for a moment that somebody who is, labeled a terrorist deserves to be bumped off. I mean, it would be great if Hafiz Saeed, for example, could be handed over by Pakistan to India to face trial here. I am not suggesting that he be bumped off, but a terrorist, sir. That's how the world treated Osama bin Laden. That's how the world looks at the likes of Hafiz Saeed. And therefore, India had every right to look at this man with suspicion and with unease. And when you have friendly ties with another democracy, you expect that democracy to be sensitive to your national security concerns. Tell me, sir, if Osama bin Laden was found hiding in Abbottabad in Pakistan, what did the United States try and do? What did they do eventually? They went inside and took the man out.
Okay.
So
now,
I'm not talking about the man being a plumber. I'm talking about the fact that he was a terrorist as far as India is concerned.
Okay. Now, about that, you said a terrorist is a terrorist is a terrorist. Well, we all know that Israel calls many Palestinians terrorists. So let's understand that the word, quote, terrorist, unquote, is being used in international discourse with considerable flexibility. So just because A calls B a terrorist, well, it doesn't follow that B is a terrorist in the eyes of the rest of the world. That's point number one. Now, coming to snooping, telephone calls, you said, how can you do it between friendly countries? I thought I told you that America did it with Merkel, Germany. So, it is happening. Let us not sort of, let's be realistic. As I said, it is wrong, but it is happening. Many things happen which are wrong. And we also know in India about Pegasus. Okay, so let us not be so innocent about these things. But the main point is this: Canada has an obligation to discharge its obligations under the Vienna Convention. You see, that Canada has not done till now. Let us hope that Canada, in respect of Indian entities and the Kanishka and all that. I was in Canada when it happened. I was there when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. And if I had gone to the Foreign Office once seeking protection for our entities, that is diplomatic missions, State Bank of India, and other entities, I must have gone 30 times, every time giving something in writing. But I'm sorry to say, RCMP did not act with diligence. And because they did not act with diligence, I was attacked in Winnipeg. These Khalistanis, they were able to throw eggs on me and hit me on my head. Why? The RCMP 8 of them were to protect me, but how silly they can be. 4 of them walked in front of me, 4 of them walked behind me as I was getting into their car instead of giving me a ring of protection.
Sir, I understand
But,
the point that you're
as I said-
making. You know, throwing eggs at somebody might seem silly, sir, but the assassination of the Prime Minister of a country is a very serious act of terror, you would agree. You know, blowing up an aircraft that leaves 331 people dead is not a silly act, sir. It's a very serious act of terror. And with due respect, sir, I mean, I have the highest regard for you, sir. But, you know, if the world were to actually start showing a great deal of flexibility about the definition of terrorism, then I think India would be in a lot of trouble, sir, because then, you know, the rest of the world will start calling a lot of Pakistani terrorists who have shed Indian blood freedom fighters, sir. That is where the problem lies. Every time, you know, names of certain terrorists come up for listing as global terrorists at the United Nations Security Council, China blocks them, and that is a problem that India has had for a long time, sir. So I think you can only show so much flexibility as far as the definition of terrorism and terror acts go, in my humble opinion, sir. But let me go back to Shri at this point.
Yeah,
Shri,
just one point.
Okay,
I was not defending the flexibility. I was telling you that there is flexibility in the real world. You know that India's efforts to have a common definition have not succeeded so far.
you're quite right, sir. But then Pakistan probably thought Osama bin Laden was a noble man. The US did not think so. The rest of the world did not think so. Shri, let me come to you at this point. You know, some analysts have also said in recent days that, you know, the diplomatic row between India and Canada has put the US in a tight spot. Because on the one hand, you've seen President Biden going out of his way to woo India, to build stronger ties with India. Many say with an eye on the Indo-Pacific, with an eye to countering China. And of course, there is no denying that, you know, we are the world's oldest and largest democracy. So in that sense, we're natural partners. But on the other hand, there is this long-standing relationship that the US enjoys with Canada. There are political ties, there are economic ties. You know, they're part of the Five Eyes Alliance, they're part of G7. What do you make of some of the statements that have been made by the likes of Antony Blinken, for example, in recent days, expressing grave concern and asking for India's cooperation into this investigation?
So, Neha, my reading of how the three important allies of Canada, which is namely US, UK, Australia, have responded to this is slightly different from what we hear and read in the press. So in global diplomacy, you're often, you know, it makes sense. It is, you know, exigent to make certain comments which sound right. Okay, but what you end up doing eventually with a certain country is very different, right? So if you look at the reaction that came from Australia and UK, it was very measured. They said, yes, you know, this is something that needs to be looked into. That's all. So similarly, I think what US has said is that, yeah, I mean, if this is true, then I think this is something that needs to be investigated and looked into. Fine. I mean, that's fine. But the fact is today, for you know, US, for UK, for Australia, India is a far more important partner strategically than Canada is. The world needs India, especially the Western world needs India to counterbalance China in the Indo-Pacific region. So it's very clear that you know, who will they go with if it comes to the crunch? But yes, Canada is, you know, shares a border with the US. You know, so it is important for them to be seen making the right statements. Now, whether this is going to cause any kind of underlying shift in the way countries deal with each other or the commitments which they have made to each other, especially now, given the significant trajectory to which the India-US relation has moved to, I don't think that will happen. These are statements that countries often make, their diplomatic teams make, to, you know, make the right noise. But what happens eventually could be very different, and that depends on the interests of each of these countries. And right now, their interest is protected in a good relationship, in maintaining a good relationship with India. So that is how I look at this, Neha. I wouldn't want to attach too much importance to the statements that they have given. These are things that come out. But I think ultimately the reality could be very different.
I agree. There are things that countries say, and also, like I said at the start of the show, it's very interesting. Another point that's been made by analysts that who feel that this isn't an India-Canada problem. This is a Justin Trudeau India problem. We've had guests on our show in the last few days who suggested that if Justin Trudeau is voted out of office in next year's general election, which is, by the way, a strong possibility, then India-Canada ties could in fact be back on track. And I have an update for our viewers at this point. A red corner notice has been issued by Interpol against Babbar Khalsa terrorist Karanveer Singh. According to sources, Karanveer Singh, a resident of Punjab, is currently in Pakistan. Karanveer Singh is said to be the son of senior Babbar Khalsa terrorists Wadhwa Singh and Harvinder Singh Rinda. They in fact escaped from India and are hiding in Pakistan too, and have been indulging in terror activities with the help of the ISI. Karanveer Singh managed to escape from India as well and is currently in hiding in Pakistan. So this is not India calling him a terrorist alone, ladies and gentlemen. This is Interpol that has issued a red corner notice against this man. But guess what? Interpol has issued red corner notices against other Khalistani terrorists as well in the past, many of whom have been living on Canadian soil, but the Canadian authorities have chosen to look the other way. I'm completely out of time, but this is of course a story that we'll continue to track very closely here on Global Lens. On that note, Ambassador Fabian, Ambassador Trigunyat and Sri, thank you so much for joining us on the show. All right, time for us to take a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere, lots more on the other side.
How do you